The first call I received on New Year's Day morning came from an attorney's office. The second call came from my mother-in-law. I didn't answer either one. But I had mailed them both a manila envelope on December 28th, and that envelope was already doing its work without me having to say a single word. For 4 Christmas dinners in a row, those people had gathered around a table with me sitting right there, present, visible, quietly passing every dish, and not one of them had spoken my name. Not once. Not even by accident. And what I did next, they never saw coming. Before I continue, subscribe to this channel right now if you have ever sat in a room full of people who were supposed to love you and felt yourself disappearing one silence at a time. This story is for you specifically. My name is Maya. I am 33 years old. I work as a senior financial analyst at a mid-size investment firm in Cincinnati, and I have for the past 6 years. I am the kind of person other people describe as calm under pressure, which is a professional compliment that also tells you something about the personal cost of being that person. I am methodical. I like spreadsheets the way some people like music. They calm something down inside me. I like documentation. I like knowing exactly where every dollar is and what it's doing and why it's there. My colleagues trust my numbers because I don't allow emotion to distort data. That's a skill I built deliberately, not a quality I was born with. I came from a family where money was always weaponized to keep people small, and I made a decision in my mid-20s that that particular inheritance would end with me. I met my husband Daniel at a work event 6 years ago. Project manager. Smart and measured and steady, or at least that's what I believed for a long time. His family was from a suburb outside Columbus. Close-knit, he told me. Traditional was what he actually meant. I came from a different background, more urban, more self-made, more mixed in every sense of that word. When Daniel first brought me home for Thanksgiving that first year, I noticed something I chose not to name yet. His mother, Linda, spoke warmly to every single person in the room and used their names as naturally as breathing. She said, "Daniel, get your father a drink." She said, "James, your sister is calling from the kitchen." She looked directly at me when she spoke and said, with a smile I now understand was purely decorative, "Would you like some more gravy?" She didn't say Maya. But it was the first visit. I told myself she was nervous. I told myself I was being too sensitive, which is the thing women are trained to tell themselves when something feels wrong but there's no bruise to point to yet. By Christmas of that first year, I was Maya to no one in that house. Let me back up and be precise about something, because precision is how I process things, and it's also the reason this story ended the way it did. Daniel and I got married in April of our 3rd year together. Small wedding, 60 people, intentional about every guest on the list. His family attended. Linda cried during the ceremony, which I thought meant something real at the time. His father, Robert, shook my hand at the reception and said, "You're a good match for my son." He said my son. He did not say my name. I noticed. I filed it. I told myself it was old-school masculinity, a man who didn't do warmth easily. I gave everyone the room to grow into me. The financial interweaving started almost immediately after the wedding. Daniel and I opened a joint account for household expenses and shared savings. My income was larger, significantly. I was bringing home approximately $94,000 that year. Daniel earned around $61,000. We agreed to contribute proportionally to the joint account, which was my proposal. I drafted a simple document outlining the terms. Daniel laughed at it warmly, called it very you, and signed it. Looking back now, that laugh meant something I wasn't ready to decode yet. The first transfer out of the joint account to his family happened 6 weeks after our wedding. $800. Daniel told me his parents' car needed a repair and they were short this month. I said, of course. I said family helps family, because that's what I was raised to believe, and I wanted to believe it still. 3 months after that, $1,200. His mother needed dental work that her insurance didn't cover. Another 3 months after that, $600 because his sister Tara's rent had a gap. I approved every single one of these requests through Daniel, who always came to me with information rather than questions. He stated, I absorbed. That was a dynamic I had agreed to without knowing I was agreeing to it, and I allowed it to build without measuring it. Every Christmas I arrived at that house with something made by hand or carefully chosen. First year, a tin of shortbread cookies from a recipe I'd tested twice to get right. Second year, a roasted sweet potato dish with herbs I'd spent the better part of a Saturday on. Third year, a bottle of wine I'd researched and a cutting board I'd had engraved with their family name. Linda accepted each of these things from me at the door. She placed them on the counter or on the table, and each time, without turning to look at me, she said some version of the same sentence. First year, how sweet. Second year, Daniel's wife brought something. Third year, oh, something from the wife. 3 years in, 3 Christmas dinners, 3 front door moments where I handed something made with my hands and heard myself described as a pronoun and a legal function. The 4th Christmas was December 24th of this past year. We arrived at 5 in the afternoon. Daniel's sister, Tara, was already there with her kids. His brother Marcus had driven in with his girlfriend, who had been welcomed by name at her first family dinner 18 months ago. The house smelled like cinnamon and old carpet, and something frying deep in the kitchen. I brought a bottle of wine and a tin of sea salt caramels I had made from scratch the night before, standing in my kitchen at 11 p.m. with melted sugar and a candy thermometer. I handed them to Linda at the door. She said, "Oh, how sweet." She turned into the house and called out toward the living room. "Daniel brought wine and something." He was still parking the car. I stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds, holding the door open with no one holding it for me. Drop the word "rise" in the comments right now if you have ever handed something of yourself to people who couldn't return the smallest courtesy of your name. I read every single one. That dinner lasted 5 hours and 14 minutes. I was present for every minute. I helped set the table. I refilled the water pitcher twice. I cleared dishes without being asked, which is a reflex I've had since childhood. Keep moving, stay useful, earn your right to be in the room. 11 people sat at that table with me, people who were my family by law, people I had fed and helped financially and shown up for when it was inconvenient. In 5 hours and 14 minutes, no one said my name. Not Linda, not Robert, who sat at the head of the table and told 3 long stories about people I had never met. Not Tara, who had once told me she was glad Daniel found someone like me. Not Daniel, not once. Not even when speaking directly to me, the way you can navigate a conversation by using you and hey without ever crossing into the territory of a name. At 10:47 p.m., I put on my coat. Daniel was in the living room with Marcus. I walked to the kitchen where Linda was wrapping leftovers in aluminum foil, precise and methodical, folding each edge. I said, "Thank you for having us, Linda." She said, "Of course, hun." She didn't look up from the foil. I walked to the car. I sat in the passenger seat in the dark and watched the light from the windows fall across the driveway in gray rectangles. The house was warm and lit behind the curtains, and I could see the shapes of people moving through it. I did not cry. I did something that takes far more control than crying. I got completely quiet. Daniel came out 41 minutes later. He said, "You okay?" I said yes. He said, "Sorry about tonight," which was his version of acknowledging what had happened without having to name it precisely, which was a skill he had also developed over the years, and which I had also allowed without naming. I said it's fine. He turned on the car. We drove home. Neither of us said anything specific about the specific thing that had happened, which was the same silence we had been living inside for 4 years. And that silence had been costing me something I hadn't yet added up. I could not sleep. I got up at 2:15 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table in the dark with my laptop open. The apartment was cold and still. The heat had clicked off, and the only light was the blue-white glow of the screen. I did what I always do when I need to think without sentiment interfering. I opened a spreadsheet. I went back through 4 years of joint account statements. Every line. I tagged every transfer that had gone out to Linda, to Robert, to Tara, to Marcus. I cross-referenced the dates against the conversations I could recall: the car repair, the dental work, the rent gap, the emergency room visit in the fall of our second year that required $2,400 in immediate cash, the family trip to Gatlinburg that Daniel described as a boys' weekend, which I later understood from a photograph had included Linda and Robert. He paid for it from our shared money. I had agreed to the account. I had not agreed to fund a vacation I wasn't invited to. The birthday gifts he bought for his mother on our joint account, 4 of them over 4 years, which I had agreed to but not totaled, came to just over $1,100 combined. I finished the accounting at 4:38 in the morning. I wrote the total at the bottom of the last column: $47,200 over 4 years. From a joint account I had contributed to at approximately 60%, which means roughly $28,300 of my specific money had moved to people who did not know my name. I sat with that number for a long time. The kitchen was very still. The number just sat there in the column, plain and clean the way numbers always are. They don't perform. They don't apologize. They just are. I closed the laptop. I went back to bed. I did not sleep, but I was completely calm, and that calm had a different quality than any calm I'd had before. It wasn't patience this time. It was the specific calm of a woman who has finally calculated the real cost of her own silence. December 27th, 9:06 in the morning. My phone rang, and the name on the screen read Aunt Pat. Patricia. Daniel's aunt, his father Robert's older sister. I had met her exactly 3 times: at our wedding, at a family 4th of July event the first summer, and once at a funeral for a distant cousin. She called me every year on my birthday. Always. I had always found this quietly touching and never questioned it. I answered. She said, "Maya, is Daniel in the room?" He wasn't. She said, "Good. I need to tell you something. And I need to ask if I can come over today. I've been watching this family do something to you for 4 years. I kept waiting for someone to stop it, and nobody did. I have some things that I think belong to you now. Not to Daniel. To you." She arrived at noon. She wore a coat the color of charcoal, and she carried a folder the way someone carries something they've been holding for a long time and are finally ready to set down. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. The winter light came through the window behind her and made the room look like a still photograph taken by someone who knew something was about to change. She opened the folder. Patricia had been the family's black sheep for 15 years. She had been quietly removed from gatherings, spoken about in reduced tones as the one who caused trouble. The trouble she had caused was this. When Daniel's grandfather died 11 years ago and left a modest estate, a house, a savings account, a small property in Knox County, Patricia had asked questions about the division of assets. She was overruled. She was then exiled. But she kept everything. She kept every document, every letter, every scrap of paper that had passed through her hands during that period. Because Patricia was also a woman who understood that the truth only protects you if you have it written down somewhere. The folder contained a letter in Daniel's grandfather's own handwriting, dated 3 weeks before he passed, addressed to no one specifically, but expressing clearly that he intended for his estate to be divided equally among all 4 grandchildren. It was not a legal will, but it was signed, it was dated, it was real. The actual legal will that had been filed was different from this letter's intentions. Daniel had received his designated share without incident, but the shares that should have gone to two of the younger grandchildren, a cousin currently living in Atlanta and Patricia's own daughter, had been absorbed into what was described as a family fund managed by Robert and Linda, which had never been formally distributed. Patricia's daughter alone was owed approximately $22,000 by Patricia's careful estimate. There was no active legal dispute at that moment, but the documentation existed, and it was real. I looked across the kitchen table at Patricia. She looked back at me with the specific expression of a woman who has been sitting with evidence for a long time and knows exactly what it's worth. She said, "You want to know one more thing?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Linda calls you the wife when she talks about you on the phone. I've heard it with my own ears. She has called you that to her friends. She has called you that to her pastor. She called you that to Daniel's grandmother before she passed. 4 years, Maya. 4 years, and she has never said your name to another person when you weren't physically standing there." I already knew this, somewhere underneath everything I had been telling myself. But hearing it said out loud by someone who had watched it, who had cared enough to keep watching, something in the structure of how I had been holding this shifted. Not cracked, shifted, like a very old building finally settling into the truth of what it actually was. Patricia left the folder with me. She stood at the door, her coat still buttoned, and she looked back at me with something careful and clear in her face. She said, "I'm not asking you to burn anything down. I'm just asking you to know what's yours." She paused. Then she said, "You want it quiet, or you want it true?" I thought about that question for 2 full days. The answer I came to was, I want it documented. This is what the envelope contained. I want to be specific, because specificity is the only language that reaches people who have relied on your vagueness to protect themselves. 4 items. First, a formal letter typed on my own professional letterhead, my full name, my address, the date in the upper right corner, addressed to Robert and Linda Calloway. Not threatening, not emotional, a precise accounting. Every financial transfer from our joint account to members of their immediate family over 4 years. Itemized, totaling $47,200, with a notation that this accounting had been shared with my attorney and was now on legal record. Second, a copy of the grandfather's handwritten letter provided by Patricia, with a typed note indicating that the original document had been preserved and its existence was known. Third, a formal request drafted by the attorney I had hired on December 26th for a post-nuptial financial agreement that would legally separate my individual contributions to any future joint expenses. Fourth item, my attorney's business card. Nothing else needed to be on it. I mailed the envelope December 28th. 1 to Robert and Linda, 1 sent digitally to Daniel's email with a note that said only, "I wanted you to see what I sent and why. We can talk when you're ready." December 29th, December 30th. I cleaned the apartment slowly and thoroughly, the way you clean when you've made a large decision and your hands need something to do. I cooked real food. I went for a walk in the gray cold and let the winter air settle against my face, and I thought about every Christmas dinner, every dish I'd brought, every place card with my name missing, every moment I had absorbed and excused because I believed patience was a form of grace. It isn't. I know that now. Patience without limits is just a different name for permission. New Year's Eve. Daniel's family had planned a gathering at his parents' house, 20 people, the same house, the same rooms where my name had been withheld like something they'd decided not to give me. I went. Daniel watched me all morning with the look of a man trying to read a document he hadn't been given the key to understand. I got dressed carefully, black dress, low heels. My hair up in the kind of arrangement that takes 12 minutes and looks considered. I wore no jewelry except my wedding ring, which I kept on deliberately, because the statement I was making wasn't in my hands. It was already in their possession, sitting on a kitchen counter or a desk in Columbus, waiting. We arrived at 7. Linda opened the door. She looked at Daniel and said, "Oh good, you're here." She looked at me and said, "Come on in." I walked past her into the house. I said, "Happy New Year, Linda." She closed the door. By 8:30, I had received 3 text messages from relatives I had never personally spoken to, asking who Maya was and whether I was Daniel's wife. The envelope had reached them. The conversations had started moving through the room the way real information always moves, sideways and quietly and faster than anyone plans for. 2 cousins who had been at family events for years but never introduced themselves came to find me in the kitchen, shook my hand, and said my name when they introduced themselves. They probably didn't know why they did it, but I noticed. At 9:15, Linda came into the kitchen where I was standing with a glass of sparkling water. She looked at me with the specific expression of a person who has underestimated something and is still deciding how to respond to the new information. She said, "We need to talk." I said, "We don't need to do anything tonight, Linda. Tonight is a celebration." She started to form a sentence, and I said, very quietly, so that no one else could hear, "I know you received the letter. I know you're frightened. That's appropriate." I picked up my glass and walked back into the living room, and I felt the particular steadiness of a woman who has already said everything that needed saying in 12-point font with her attorney's name on it. At 11:59, as the countdown began, Linda stood in the middle of the living room and raised a glass to give a toast. She did what she always did. She went around the room. She named everyone, warmly, by name, the way she did when she wanted to perform closeness for an audience. She got to Daniel. She said, "And my son, who I am so proud of." She paused. The room was mid-countdown. People were watching her. She looked directly at me. And then, for the first time in 4 years of Christmas and New Year's and every dinner and holiday in between, she said, "And Maya." The room hit midnight. Someone popped a champagne bottle. People hugged. Music came on from somewhere. And I stood in the middle of that living room and heard my name and felt, not triumph, not vindication, something more complicated and more quiet than either of those things. I felt the specific grief of knowing it took a legal document to make them remember I was a person with a name. That's the part nobody tells you in these stories. The win doesn't arrive the way the movies say it does. It arrives like standing in a room that finally got something right, 4 years too late, for reasons that have nothing to do with love. January came in cold and clarifying. Daniel and I had conversations I won't fully detail here, not because they don't matter, but because they're still in progress. What I can tell you is that he sat with the accounting I presented and did not dispute a single number. He said he thought he was helping his family. I said I know. I said I was also helping his family. I just wasn't aware of the full extent of it. And I wasn't being thanked for it, or included, or even named for it. And I needed him to sit with the difference between those 2 things. He didn't have an answer. He's still sitting with it. I'm giving him space because I believe in allowing people the room to reckon honestly, but I am no longer the kind of woman who waits indefinitely. My attorney filed the postnuptial agreement framework on January 4th. Robert and Linda have not responded formally, but the transfers out of the joint account stopped. I know because I check it now with the attention I should have been giving it from the beginning, not from suspicion, but from the understanding that love doesn't exempt anyone from accountability, and never should. Tara called me in February. She said she was sorry. I said thank you. She said she hadn't understood how bad it had gotten. I said, very gently, "I think you did understand, and I think you made a choice, and I understand that choice was hard." She was quiet. I said, "I'm not angry at you, Tara." Then I said, "But I'm not the same person I was in December. So we'll have to figure out what we want to build from here, if anything." She said she understood. She hasn't called back. I left the door open 1 inch. An inch is enough for someone who's ready to walk through it honestly. Patricia and I have lunch now, second Tuesday of every month at a diner on the east side of Cincinnati that does good coffee and doesn't rush you. She orders scrambled eggs and wheat toast and black coffee, the same thing every time. She asks how I'm doing, and I tell her the truth, which is the only thing she has ever been interested in. She says, "Good, keep going." That's the sum total of her emotional support style, and it is exactly enough. She is the kind of woman who respects you most for what you actually do, and I have come to believe that is one of the highest forms of regard. I started therapy in January, Thursday evenings, with a therapist named Dr. Anita Osei, who has a particular gift for asking questions that sound simple until they land somewhere deep and specific. In our third session, she asked me, "What did you need those people to give you?" I said, "My name." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And what does it mean that you gave them everything else first?" We are still working on that one. I am not in any hurry. By March, the social orbit that Daniel's parents moved in, church friends, neighbors, extended family, knew the rough shape of what had happened. Not because I told them. I told no one except my attorney, Patricia, and Dr. Osei. But truth moves. It moves slowly and sideways, and through rooms where no one expects it, and the silence of a woman who has decided to stop absorbing without response. That specific silence moves fastest of all. I am not healed. I want to be careful to tell you that, because this channel is about what's real, not what's tidy. I am 33 years old and I am in the middle of rebuilding something, a marriage, a financial structure, a sense of my own name as something I don't need other people's permission to have. Some mornings I wake before 5 and lie in the half dark and feel the weight of all the energy I spent on people who spent nothing on me. And I grieve it. That grief is not weakness. That grief is the correct response to something genuinely lost. But here is what I also know, sitting here 6 months out from that envelope. I am not invisible. I was never invisible. I was standing in rooms that needed me more than they were willing to admit. And I let that need pass for inclusion for far too long. 4 Christmases of grace I handed over freely to people who were depositing my money into their accounts while calling me the wife to their pastor. That's not love. That was convenience. And the difference between those two things is worth knowing. The last time I drove past Linda and Robert's house, I did not slow down. I did not need to. Everything I needed to say has already been said in 12-point font, notarized, filed, and mailed. There is something deeply, quietly satisfying about a truth that exists in triplicate. My name is Maya. It took a piece of paper to make certain people say it, but it has been mine the whole time. And I never needed their permission to know that. I just needed to stop behaving like I did. If this touched something real, something you have been carrying in rooms where your name gets swallowed, share it today with someone who needs to hear it.